Let's go ahead and get started. Tonight, we're talking about Down syndrome and teletherapy. Teletherapy for the lucky few. And I'm really excited to share one of my dearest friends with all of you. This is my good friend, Jennifer Gray, here in Colorado. And when I have a client with Down syndrome and I'm not quite sure what to do, Jen's the one I call, and she and I will go for a hike together. We'll go for a long walk up a really tough hill, trying to burn some calories and just brainstorm about how I can help this child. So Jen is my go-to when it comes to kids or adults with Down syndrome. But she's also an expert, in my opinion, on teletherapy. Why? Because she's been doing it for over 3 years, and she has a whole private practice with numerous employees that use telepractice all the time. So we're going to combine those two pieces of knowledge that Jen's bringing to us tonight, and we're going to be answering your questions. So be sure to type your questions in the comments. But for right now, I would love to introduce my dear friend, Jennifer, also my roommate at the American Speech Language Hearing Association's National Conference this year. And Jen, I could say so many really great things about you, but honestly, it's a little better, I think. Why don't you tell everybody about your background, how you fell in love with these kids with Down syndrome, and how you got so interested in teletherapy?
Okay. I usually tell people it was kind of an accident or a happy accident. It wasn't something I necessarily planned, but I had a really strong background in speech, which seems obvious when you're a speech pathologist, but more recently, the focus has been on language for a very long time. And so I knew a lot about speech, and then I was also lucky enough to get external training after graduate school in feeding, which we don't typically get in school. And so just my experience with those two things primarily brought certain families to us or to me. And over time, those two groups, or three, sort of kind of came about with cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and childhood apraxia of speech. And at that time, I'm old enough to know that it wasn't even a diagnosis yet at that time, but we knew that there was something different here, and we weren't sure. Typical therapies weren't necessarily working if we weren't looking at motor planning, and we weren't looking at how the mouth moves, and we weren't looking at feeding. Our speech wasn't improving through just language modalities. And so I just had a lot of experience with people with Down syndrome. And so as I moved to Colorado, that word of mouth just kind of grew, because it occurred to me, and it occurred to the families with people with Down syndrome, young children at first, was, gosh, no one is really looking at my child and listening to me when I tell them what they need and what they're capable of. Mm-hmm. And so kind of early in my career, I just got really good at listening, doing what I knew about speech and what I knew about feeding, and then reading everything I possibly could in the world about Down syndrome and how it might help me try to figure out this population. And so I think I was just curious enough, and I had the right background.
And what spurred you to start teletherapy, though, especially with this particular population? And have you found it to be successful?
For various reasons. So at ASH, I actually spoke on this, and I wrote a blog post that really was kind of the first thing out there about this, but it was out of necessity at first, because people don't have access to specialists that know anything about Down syndrome in the areas of speech and language. There just aren't any of us, or at least we're not calling ourselves that, and there's not a lot of information out there. And so people needed a way to talk to therapists or find therapy that wasn't necessarily in their area. And in Colorado, we have people all over that can't necessarily come down from the mountains to go to a specialist. And so it kind of started there. And then when we started doing it, it was, gosh, this is perfect, because they learn visually, and it takes out the noise, and they were able to focus in a medium that they loved, that was highly visual. And if we learned to cater to their strengths and their interests, everything got better. We weren't seeing them not want to participate. Parents were more interested. Our older kids were learning the technology, so they didn't need someone next to them at all times. And so we've even had some of our teams that can log in on their own. And mom's like, oh, I totally forgot. But they've already logged in. They may have even texted their therapist ahead of time. I'm 5 minutes late, or are you there? I'm ready. And so it just sort of blossomed into a mode of therapy that works really, really well for this population.
Well, and I know you and I have been chatting about the importance of oral exams, and you were mentioning to me earlier that one of the benefits that you've noticed when it comes to teletherapy is the ability to use the throat scope to really light up somebody's mouth. And you're actually dropping off some of these. Of course, they're in a starter pack and they're sterile to your families so that they have one at home, that so that you can look inside that child's mouth. And I'm I want everyone to really pay attention to this point, because I thought you brought up such a good point to me about oral exams, why they're so important, and how you're doing those over teletherapy. Can you just chat a little bit about that for our audience?
Sure. I mean, we know that people with Down syndrome have very different oral cavities. They teeth in very different ways. They're hard to predict. Their palate is high. Their jaw tends to be thrust forward. Their tongues hang low in their mouth. And so pretty much everything about speech and feeding for this population has to do with how they are anatomically and physiologically different. And so knowing what's going on in the mouth oftentimes gives us a clue to not only their speech and their feeding, but their health and why we may not be progressing. And in teletherapy, I think we initially, I'll tell it myself, I think we sort of forgot that piece.
Yes.
Because we weren't there, and so we kind of, we can't touch them. But interestingly, it kind of brought us back really quickly that we need to do that, and we need to be sure we can do that. And with that parent coaching model that early intervention uses, but we need to be using all the time, especially with this population, we found ways to do it, and the teletherapy actually reminded us to do it. Like, oh, what's going on there? Because now I have to use my eyes, and I need to see. I can't rely on what I'm observing in life necessarily.
So if I were the parent right now and you were coaching me and I had my own throat scope, you would have a throat scope as well to show me what to do and to coach me through the process.
Exactly.
Essentially video modeling when you think about it.
Exactly, which we use a lot.
Fantastic. And you were telling me a story also about a child who had a submucosal cleft, was it?
Mm-hmm. We had a recent, I've kind of been talking about this a lot because it really brought it home to us that a young child with Down syndrome, who we've been seeing for quite a while and just wasn't progressing. It was speech-wise in terms of being able to make plosive sounds, and we were starting to get kind of puzzled. Yeah. And this was prior to knowing about throat scope, but one of my really good therapists observed from a distance when the child was laughing or being loud and opening his mouth, she noticed he had a bifid uvula. And then she noticed that something else was a little strange. And so even from a distance was able to tell, oh gosh, that would explain some things. And it did turn out that this child had a submucosal cleft, meaning the skin was over the palate, but that bony process hadn't formed, which impacts their ability to make a plosive sound. And so what we also found with that child was everyone missed it. We were the first ones to go in there and say, oh, and it turned out that somebody had noticed it early on, but oftentimes with Down syndrome, there's so much going on. Sometimes we forget something that seems non-life threatening or may not be impacting their health, or we can't see.
Right.
Is a huge problem that we might be the first ones, even if that hadn't been noticed in the past, we might be the first ones in that child's mouth to see tonsils that are way too large.
That's true.
That are strange. I mean, things that really do impact sleep, functioning, speech, and feeding. And so I think it's important to remember we have to do those things.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I'm going to be doing another event for Throat Scope with a certified oral-facial myologist, and we're going to be talking about that airway is everything. And it's very, very easy when a child has a diagnosis like CP or Down syndrome or autism for us to get blinded by that label and forget to really look at the whole child. And I think especially right now, I want to stress to everyone that we have to be careful now that we're doing so much telehealth, that we don't let this screen be a barrier to being a good detective. Definitely important to be a good detective. I'm going to just share one funny story, though. You're going to kill me for telling everybody this, but I'm telling it. So I was mentioning to everybody here in the audience, we're going to be taking your questions here in a few minutes too, that Jennifer and I were roommates at the American Speech Language Hearing Association's conference this year. And Jen brought us matching Cookie Monster pajamas. Seriously. I have the pictures to prove it.
Yeah.
And so we're hanging out in our Cookie Monster pajamas because it's just kind of how we roll. And I was telling her that I'm going to be doing a book signing at the Throatscope booth. And you were like, I'm not that familiar with Throatscope. I said, oh, you got to come by. So at the end of the conference, I walk into our hotel room and Jennifer has got the starter packs like this and boxes of blades for her entire staff. And we are trying to repack all of her luggage so she can get all this home to put in their holiday gift bags. And so in their holiday gift bags, they all got starter packs and a big box of recyclable blades as well. Because you're the best boss ever.
Yeah, I had to smuggle 500 blades in my luggage. It was tricky. I just really moved away.
It was so great. Hey, we were just chatting about video modeling, and I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, because I know you're a big fan of that. How do you incorporate that into telehealth, obviously, and with this particular population?
So we've been using video modeling for a long time, even in our in-person sessions. And we've had to use it even more now. And so it's something that works no matter what. But basically, if you show anyone, think about late night TV, for example, is what I usually describe is that hamburger or that cheeseburger commercial comes on. You're not hungry at all, but now you are, because you just that person eat that food, right? People's food looks better when it's not yours. And that same model works for all learning, especially for children. So if we have a population that may not have those learning opportunities from peers, like maybe they would if they were on the in typical classrooms more or what have you, video modeling will immediately show them how to do something well. And that can be another child doing something through video or YouTube, and even more salient, though, and more powerful is pictures of them or videos of them doing something well. And so if you can just catch a child doing something well in a picture or a video and replay it, and I mean replay it, the research is showing us that it will be repeated much more likely, even when there's a span of time in between seeing it and doing it. And so we try to use that video modeling every single session for that idea that they learn visually and not auditorily as well. And so the more we can do that, the better outcomes we have and the faster outcomes that we have.
And on that same note, for a long time, I've created video social stories for my kids, especially when they're trying a new food and how to manage their anxiety and do their deep breathing. And we actually take pictures of the kids and we go into an app and we create our own little video about it. And one of the things I love about that type of video modeling is A, I can pull it up and screen share in Teletherapy, but B, they can practice it at home and it's very consistent. It's the same story every single time. And when you're a visual learner and you need that consistency, it is such a simple tool that can make all the difference for these kids.
Yeah, we complain about kids watching the same movie over and over and over and over. Well, it's for a reason, because that they learn really well that way. And Down syndrome adds another layer that we have found too, which is they like knowing what's coming next. And in feed therapy, that's huge. If they're nervous that something else is going to happen that they can't predict, that can cause so many behavior problems and actually stop us in our tracks if we aren't aware of it. So watching the same thing over and over again works for them. We just as adults have to remember that it's not boring for them, they actually like it. They kind of perk up and they're with you because I know what's happening and I know what's going to happen next, and it's safe.
It builds a lot of confidence.
Right. And we can also get those new skills. They can watch those new skills
Yeah.
without doing them first. So they can see maybe what they're going to learn before we put that demand on them. So it has so many uses.
That's a really, really good point. I wanted to ask you too, because I'm wondering with your telepractice, how often are you providing services for families? Are you scheduling twice a week or once a week, every other week? What's typical?
It kind of depends on the service that they need. So with early intervention, we're kind of stuck in that 1 hour, one time a week. That's pretty typical. But with teletherapy, we're all learning this, but we know it particularly for this population is an hour is a long time. And when you take out the business of coming into the home and all those transitions of getting ready and then putting things away and then getting ready to leave, when all that noise is gone, we actually get much more focused practice in terms of frequency and intensity in a much shorter time. And so kind of like if there's any SLPs listening, kind of like that 5-minute RTIC idea where if we can come in and do something really well for a short amount of time, but consistently, and motor planning is the same way, so apraxia is the same way, where we know if we have shorter sessions, more times a week, they're going to learn the skill faster. And it's actually in psychology of learning, it's that we all learn better that way. So we are trying to do more sessions that are shorter and more often. And the kids like it too because it's short. I know I'm going to come in here, I know I'm going to do this for a little bit, and then we're done. And so now we have even better compliance.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think that's really sort of a new thought around teletherapy, that we might be able to do those shorter sessions that are also more conducive to the family schedule and also would provide more consistency over time rather than that lag between the week. And then I also want to ask you one more thing. With all the chatter now about teletherapy, one thing that's really come home for me is it's honestly just another piece of technology, another modality for coaching the parent. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, so we kind of think of it as a replacement therapy, but quite honestly, even when this, COVID crisis is over, we'll probably still use it because its benefits are plentiful. And with the coaching model, especially when we know we're supposed to do this in EI, it's often hard to teach a parent what they need to be doing when we're not there. Teletherapy almost demands it because they have to be there. We can't just leave a 2-year-old in front of a screen. And so what's happening is I think parents are even finding it easier to learn what to do with their child because they sort of have to. And so as a therapist, we're coaching the whole time. Okay, try it this way. Well, how did your week go? What did you do? You can show me. I can see videos maybe if they can't show me right now, if it's a bad nap day or something. So coaching the parents becomes really most of what we do. And so there too, we're having those better outcomes. And I think parents are a little more comfortable because we're not in their home telling them they should do something different, but more like, okay, what do you have? What's going on? Let's problem solve, which is really what therapy should be anyway, is a problem solving communication between us and families. And this kind of demands it. And so it's actually working well. I know that's what therapists most fear, I think, but it's a more natural teaching method for me, at least, through teletherapy for some reason. And it's also easier for scheduling. So when we have to cancel clients because it snowed, because someone has a sniffle and we're not really sure if they're sick, but we don't really want to get sick. And so there's less cancellations and parents aren't driving if they're older children. And so those short, frequent sessions are all of a sudden possible because we don't have travel.
It's I think I'm going to be doing it more, even when I don't have to.
We have to be. And being with a child and a family is never going to be replaced. We need that. I think a hybrid approach is probably what's going to be most common.
Yeah. I love the idea of a hybrid approach. Well, I can see that we have lots and lots of questions that are popping up, and I'm going to put some on the screen here for you, Jennifer. Most of them are for you. There is one question that I want to start with, though, because Leslie asks how to use the throat scope to do an oral mech exam. Well, Leslie, the reason why I popped yours up there first is we recently on the throat scope page had my good friend Amy Graham, who's also here in Colorado, provide a whole tutorial around that. And I also have another one on my YouTube channel where Amy and I did one together. So Leslie, what I'll do is rather than taking the time right now, I'll go back in after this and I'll provide some links for everyone where they can locate those videos. Let me see what else we've got here. Oh, here's a good one for you, Kathy. Kathy's asking you, what type of device are you personally using and other electronics you're using, and what platform do you use? What are you doing, Jen?
I use my laptop, but most of our families on their ends use iPads, usually, or phones sometimes, or other laptops. We don't have as much ability with desktops, but we can use anything. It just you have to have an adequate internet speed. But that's pretty much it. In terms of the platform, I don't know if you're a parent or a therapist. I use GoToMeeting. I know that Zoom is the much more popular option, and they're extremely similar. I'm trying to think back why we chose it, and I think it was money at the time. But both of those do allow for screen sharing. So we can do interactive things. I can show videos. You can show me videos. We can do games where the child actually manipulates the screen and their keyboard to or whatever.
Sure.
And so it's really nice to be able to do it that way. I know there's a lot of others, but in terms of families, it's pretty much your mobile devices.
Well, on that same note, I popped Julie's question up because it kind of piggybacks on that idea that she wants to know, can you share what motivator type games, apps, YouTube clips you prefer to use with your EI kids? And Julie, when we're all done here, I'll post and tag you. I just did a video on this topic on Monday night, and we'll make sure that you have access to that as well. But Jennifer, how about you? What are you finding, especially with kids with Down syndrome, but also EI in general, because I know you do a lot of early intervention. What sorts of things do you find are really motivating and help keep those kids' attention?
The two big ones that kind of pop into my head first, although there's many, are some of those personal pictures. So usually I'll ask parents ahead of time, hey, can you give me pictures? What did you do this weekend? Recent ones, or do you have pictures of family members that we can put up there for speech, for example? So people with Down syndrome not only learn better visually, they like words, they like letters.
Yeah.
And that love actually gives us so much opportunity for speech because we can show them really basic words on the screen that most kids would be like, ooh, I don't know about that. So pictures, even just single words, and then using YouTube a lot that we obviously control because we can literally type in. My favorite thing to type in that I usually do right off the bat is toddler eating chicken nuggets, because a lot of our kids don't, I know, a lot of kids don't like chicken nuggets. And so parents, are like, simply watching their child eat something for feeding therapy, using music as rewards, or let's talk about it, or making choices. And then there's tons of interactive and free tools through Teacher Pay Teachers and Boom Learning. And even they're not expensive either, $2 or $3 per app you can use for a long time with a family. And so you can also have document cameras that can show physical toys. Here's how you play with this toy, mom, you try it. And so we can even, use some of the manipulatives that we have, or even holding pictures up to a screen if worst case scenario, we have bad connections.
And a lot of therapists will use a document camera for some of those pictures, but what I'm taking away right now, because I haven't done this, is that you're asking the family, the parents, to send you a few pictures that are from their home, from their camera. And that's brilliant because it's an immediate connection. I mean, even when we meet a stranger, what's one of the first things we do? We ask to see pictures of their kids or their vacation, and that's how we connect. So that's really simple and brilliant.
Yeah. And even just PowerPoint, for a parent or a therapist is we can throw those pictures into PowerPoint slides and make them even more interesting, or we can use those for our goals, our speech and language goals or our feeding goals, but using their pictures. And every child loves that.
They do. And I'm also really glad that you mentioned music, because next Monday I'll be doing a Facebook Live on the My Munchbook Melanie Potock page with Ryan Judd, who was also a Colorado music therapist with me at the hospital and is now an award-winning accomplished musician on Pandora. And so he is an excellent music therapist still on the East Coast, and he's going to be connecting with us to talk about how to incorporate music into teletherapy as well. And then, as long as we're on the topic, I want to let everyone know that I'll be back with Throat Scope again to do a very special event on eosinophilic esophagitis and how to work with those kids with an SLP here in Colorado who specializes in EOE, but it's also excellent at teletherapy. So we're using, teletherapy is a hot topic right now. But what I want everyone listening to understand is all of these ideas really can be done in a hospital, in a clinic, in a person's home, and via this modality. And I really love the fact that you've brought up, I think we're going to have more of a hybrid approach in the future. And I think it's going to be a good thing for everybody, especially for these really wonderful kids. So I'm going to pop up another question here. And this is a good comment that Lauren has. She said, you can also make social stories on PowerPoint and screen share. Kids love them. That's great, Lauren. Absolutely. And what I love about that is it's easy to keep a file of your PowerPoints, and under each child's chart, I sort of keep track of what I've shared with them. It's so easy to go back to, as well as those really good YouTube links, because sometimes YouTube can be, you never know what's going to pop up. So you got to be careful to have those links ready. Here's a good one. Kate has a great question, and it's reminding me of something I wanted to share with everyone. So Kate says, have you had success during sessions over meal times to see a representative sample of what that looks like for your clients? On that same note, Kate, and to everyone listening, one thing I want to share is that Jen is really, really good at incorporating cooking into her sessions. As a matter of fact, last summer, Jennifer had a group of young adults with Down syndrome would come into her kitchen where her practice is, and you had a whole summer cooking camp. And I got to come be the special guest one time. It was so fun. And because of that, Jen and I have a special YouTube video on my YouTube channel that I'll share in the comments for everybody about cooking with kids and adults with Down syndrome and some of the special points on how we can really help them. But that's why I pulled up Kate's question, because I know that you do some sessions over meal times, but also specifically around cooking and prepping for meal times. So can you speak to Kate's question as well as just talking a little bit about how you do that?
That's a huge topic. I generally, kind of as a rule, don't do meal times. It tends to be very stressful for families, and people feel like they have to perform. But snack time I do. If I need to see that meal time, I can ask for video, and that's easy to do in this situation. And then kind of working it back and forth. But it's definitely something that is going to depend on each family. If you can sit there and watch a mealtime, just know that you're going to be an intruder, and it may not be a representative sample of a true mealtime.
Right.
But I use all of Mel's books for those types of things as well. And then what I do with cooking is you basically can achieve any goal ever in speech and language through the use of food, because we do it all day. Mm-hmm. And then when we think about people with Down syndrome, is we kind of forget those independent skills, and they tend to hold on to those lower level skills longer. And so feeding oneself, much less interacting with new foods and utensils and all of those difficulties, is if we can just get a child in the kitchen to work with food, or go to the grocery store with mom and pick stuff out and follow directions and see what it is that they may want to eat. Is just sometimes we don't realize it, but we keep kids out of that scenario. Right now is not the best time to be talking about this, because we can't go to the stores as easily, but Many families don't take their children to the grocery stores because it's stressful. Uh,
Yeah.
and then there's ways that we can, as therapists, help them do that. And bringing that piece in, even through here, I'll use pictures of grocery stores. And we let the kids pick out what it might look like. It might even be their grocery store, because if I'm local, I can do that. And then we do use some messaging apps where they can watch other children making food as well, or things that they've tried, and they can see each other doing it back and forth. And so teletherapy kind of allows us to be less intrusive in those situations where cooking and eating can be a speech language sensory feeding
Everything.
everything.
And I think it's important to distinguish that I will definitely do meal times over teletherapy, but when I say the word meal times, I'm not talking about the whole family around the table. That being said, when I go into people's homes, when we're able to, my assessment is at mealtime. So I'll ask the parent, what I'd love to do is just come over and be a fly on the wall, maybe just sit at the kitchen table while you're at the dining table. And I'm just going to type some notes and kind of see like how things go. Because the bottom line is, I don't want to see it go well for that assessment, right? I want to see it go badly, because then I know what we need to work on. And I love doing my assessments over meal times. Now that we're doing teletherapy, the whole idea of a true assessment, I think we're still just trying to figure that out. But I know Kate had another question that popped up, and she was just kind of wondering if you could comment a little bit about assessments and what you're doing with any new clients, or have you encountered that yet? This is all fairly new, so.
I might be slightly lucky because we don't have assessments specifically for people with Down syndrome. And so if we're dealing with early intervention as well, really our assessments are based on observation, parent rating scales, developmental scales. Where are they in comparison to other children their same age? But we still can do a lot of those speech and language assessments right now through a document camera, for example, or using just holding up even to your computer screen. And I don't want to necessarily do a plug for, I'm not sure, can I say a different name of a company?
Sure.
Pearson is doing some free assessment. I think they're giving you the manuals and the stimulus cards to use in therapy. It's temporary, and I don't think you can keep them, but I just learned about that yesterday. And so there are a lot of companies that are modifying their assessment tools so that you can use them. And I've listened to a lot of other therapists say, I'm having an okay time using my physical materials through this medium. There's still debate on whether or not that's a valid measure, because those measures clearly were done in person and not over teletherapy. But
Sure.
it's a healthy debate. And I think that half say, what, it is the same because it's their environment where they are. And others are saying we didn't take those measures specifically over teletherapy, so you have to be careful. But that hybrid approach, hopefully in the future, will allow us to do that. I know that early intervention programs are also doing assessments over the phone for early intervention, because it really is the parent input anyway in those situations. We as the therapist or the specialist are really there to help the parent with what they want to work on. And so it hasn't been a big issue yet.
It's good information. I think we're on a learning curve around that, so we'll have to keep talking. I just wanted to share, because this popped up. Kim shared this adorable picture and said, my daughter with Down syndrome loves to help cook and bake in the kitchen with me. I have targeted numbers, sequencing, reading, etc. with her. And that's the thing. You can target anything when it comes to cooking.
Yep. Good. I'm glad you're doing it.
Definitely. I am going to just take a quick glance here, Jen, while we're chatting, to make sure. I know we've got a few other questions here. And let's see here. Thanks so much for everybody's patience. They're kind of going by me really quick here. Oh, here we go. Jennifer asks, are there recording choices on most platforms? I'm not that familiar with all the platforms, to be honest with you, Jennifer, but definitely on Zoom there is. And for GoToMeeting, I'm assuming there is. Is that true?
And that's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's a neat way to bring family members who cannot be in session. So oftentimes hear moms say, dad can't be here. He really wanted to be, but he has to work. We can record sessions. There's some, you do have to have some paperwork signed to be able to do that. But we're also using them. I'm personally using them after we get signatures from parents, but as to teach my therapist also, because, hey, look at this, look what happened, it worked, maybe we can do this again. But we can also record portions or whole sessions so grandma can watch, the nanny can watch, dad can watch, or whoever. And now we have a way to say, here's what's going on. Because when moms sometimes, I say mom because they're usually the ones in the sessions, but sometimes relaying information isn't as accurate perhaps, or they don't feel as comfortable telling other people what to do with their child because that's what their therapist said. And so it's a neat way to review your own notes, to go back an assessment where you may not have been able to count those things right in person. So GoToMeeting does have them, Zoom does. I know that some of the lesser ones that don't have all the bells and whistles, I don't know that you can. I even in the beginning, before we had all this technology, would record them with my phone sometimes just to say, I got to catch this.
Yeah.
Much like we would do in an in-person session where mom might record it and then you can show it back to the child. And so it's a nice tool, but it's not necessary if you don't have it.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice tool. I know when I was doing in-person therapy, I would say 50% of my sessions I'm recording, if not more. Sometimes we just delete them, but it's such a great opportunity to talk with the parent afterwards. Because even if you are going to book an hour of teletherapy, the child isn't in front of the screen the whole time. It's about coaching the parent. So it might be as little as 10 minutes or maybe up to a half an hour with the child, but the time before is about planning and the time after is about, okay, let's go back and take a look and discuss like how we could have done this differently or what really worked. And it's that moment to kind of debrief, which I think is so helpful for all of us. It's helpful for me to do that. And then I'm just going to share this last question because Julie asked, can you share the app, please, Melanie? Yeah, Julie. So I use Adobe Spark. There are a lot of different apps out there where you can create little videos. Lumen 5 makes one. Adobe Spark is free. That's the one I like the best. And I have a YouTube video on how to create that. And I'll put it in the comments for everybody as well. So I'll tell you what, my friends, I thought that was pretty cool. I think, Jen, you're my dear friend, so I know how great you are. But now the whole world knows how great you are. And I'm a little disappointed that we didn't do this in our matching Cookie Monster pajamas, but I especially want to thank ThroatScope for sponsoring this event tonight. They're always such a big support for speech therapists, occupational therapists, anybody who works with kids and adults and helping them thrive. And I really appreciate their support. And I'm so excited to find out who may have won. So remember, ThroatScope will be randomly picking a winner both internationally and in the United States. So pay attention to your Facebook Messenger because they're going to message you after this and say if you won. Jen, thank you so much for this time together. I'll catch you soon. As soon as the weather gets better, we'll go on a hike together. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget to tune in Monday on the My Munchbug Melanie Potock page, where we'll be talking more about this topic, and we'll have more special events sponsored by ThroatScope. Thanks, everybody.